Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week we're Ravenous for the Whiteout of Snowy Suspense. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. I am Thomas Mariani, and, why don't you just come and join with me? I went on this big camping trip, and a few people got lost. I think they might have eaten each other. Everything will be fine, though I am not gonna stab you in the back. I mean, you can trust me, right?
And I am Adam Thomas, and I am completely and utterly forgettable.
Oh, Adam, don't say that about yourself. Come on. I remember more about you than I do maybe one of the films we're going to talk about tonight.
That's fair. I remember more about me than I don't know what the fuck I'm saying. Yeah, no, that movie's terrible.
You know yourself like the back of your hand. Oh, that's new.
You're right. Whoo, should have that looked at.
Well, welcome everybody to the Double-Edged Double Bill, in which every week Adam and I cover a good and a bad feature that we pick at the end of the previous episode related to a topic, and usually we'd like to tie it into something, but there's not as much stuff coming out this week, so we decided to do something fun and do Snowy Suspense, which basically kind of entails any kind of like big like thriller that takes place in the middle of the snow, which, we kind of talked about this at the end of our last episode, Adam, a much more fertile subject matter than we initially kind of thought it would be.
Oh, definitely, man. Yeah, for sure. I mean, instantly, like, as soon as we thought about it, I'm like, oh, yeah, what are we going to do? And then, there's this one. Oh, yeah, this one too. Oh, yeah, this one. And then you kind of like, even to get ideas, I look it up online, and there's a ton of them that would be, viable. I mean, think The Shining or Cliffhanger or any of that would work.
Or even, if we want to go even more slightly genre angle of it, like The Thing. A great example of a very snowy, suspenseful movie.
Either one of them. Oh, we could have done a double feature of those movies.
The Thing and The Thing.
Yep. And then for my redo, it would have been The Thing from Another World.
Yes, but I'm curious, Adam, as someone who has more experience with the snow than I do up there in Michigan, what do you think makes this such an interesting subgenre?
Well, I think because obviously the conditions provide their own sort of, I hate to put it this way, but antagonist, because you can freeze, get lost real easy. The whiteout situations are real, and plus, let's just be honest, 100% red splashing across white looks good.
That is true. Yes, the contrast there. It's very much, it's cinematic in of itself.
Mm-hmm.
It looks artistic, even if you're doing the most garbage, like ketchup spray.
Right,
exactly. White, just like, oh, that says so much. Art. But yeah, and I think even just as somebody who, has more experience with like a warmer climate, I find the cold inherently terrifying. Like when I came up to visit you in Michigan, there was a point where like my tear ducts nearly froze up while I was walking to your car.
And I remember that night. To be fair, though, it was pretty cold that night. I mean, I didn't have that much of a problem with it, but yeah, it was cold.
Right, you were just like, what's the matter with you? Just like, I can't feel anything. Whatever. Let's get out of here.
I could never feel anything. Get used to it.
You're numb to the coldness for sure on that. But yeah, it also just works because, like you mentioned, there's not just the inherent sort of antagonist angle to the weather conditions, but also the atmosphere of it. Like in some of the more interesting ones where like there isn't even as much snow as much as there is just like darkness. Like there are certain movies where they take advantage of the fact that the snow also makes it so like dark and impenetrable to like you're just walking into the void, basically, in some of these movies. That's inherently just scary. It's the unknown, truly.
Yeah, man, for sure. And like I said, you get turned around out there in the snow. If you're not prepared, you are probably going to die.
Yes, the ominous, scary thoughts there. But we're not here to talk about that existential dread here
I
today.
don't know, man. What would it even mean, right? Like, who would miss me? Would you ever want to view your funeral, bro?
Thank you all for escaping your daily lives to listen to this existential dread. But we're going to talk about two movies we picked at the end of the previous episode. First, we'll be talking about what we can remember about Adam's bad pick of Whiteout. And then we'll be talking about my good pick of Ravenous. Both movies that take place in the dark, desolate snow to some degree. Some of it is a bit more authentic than the others, as we'll get into right now with Whiteout.
It is the most isolated landmass on the planet. There is no permanent population. There is no horizon. No shadows. There is only white.
We have a real situation developing.
What happened out there?
We were out looking for meteor samples, and then the radar went off the charts. We hit something big.
Whiteout.
Yikes.
So, Whiteout came out September 11th, 2009, and was from director Dominic Sena, and had a bunch of different writers based on a graphic novel by Greg Rucka and Steve Leiber. And I was thinking about this, while watching this movie and not soaking in any of it, that this feels kind of like it was at that time, like post Sin City and especially 300, where studios were just like, oh fuck, just greenlight any graphic novel. Just do it now. We need a graphic novel pitch now immediately.
That is 100% what happened. But, I got to be honest, though, it did birth a lot of good ones. Like you said, 300, Road to Perdition, History of Violence. A lot of those are based on graphic novels, and they really work. This is, I'd say ultimately one of the most forgettable out of those.
Yeah, Adam, before you forget everything about it,
Fuck.
can you give people potentially at least a brief plot synopsis for Whiteout, given this was your pick?
All right. Kate Beckinsale stars as a U.S. Marshal. Something happened to her in her past as a law enforcement officer, so she's taken sort of this post out in the Antarctic, and she's about to retire, and doesn't want to be involved in law enforcement anymore. But then they get a call about someone seeing what they think is a body out in the waste tundra. So they have to go investigate. It turns out it's a murdered victim. Then they find the hull of a crashed Russian plane, which the movie opens up with, which is very what is happening? And then it kind of goes on from there, trying to discover who the killer is. That's basically it.
Yep. That is at least the basic plot. And on paper, I wouldn't mind a fun, small thriller that kind of has that angle to it. The trouble is, as we've kind of teased throughout all of this, Whiteout lives up to its correction fluid name in that the moment you watch it, it'll just dry in your eyeballs for a couple seconds and then just disappear entirely. It is completely forgettable on every conceivable level.
Yeah, 100%. I remember a lot of it just because it is still fresh, but I'm not going to remember it in a week. There's no way. I forced myself to hold on to certain things, like the really bad CGI of her partner falling out of the window that they show several times. How bad Gabriel Mott is in this, and how just much it reminds me, as much as I like Beckinsale, not a lot of range, not a big leading actress. She's fun in the underworld movies. She's incredibly beautiful. Seems like a nice person, but maybe not the greatest of actresses. And yeah, the Antarctic, for the shots that is really taking place there, is beautiful but terrifying and desolate. And then the rest is just kind of oh, hey, picket fences. Whoa, okay, not a shocker.
Hey, don't forget about the incredibly terrible green screen, which I think is way more of it than the actual frozen tundra. There's a lot of points.
Yeah, well, like I said, the dude falling from the window.
No, but even just people walking outside the station where it's like Tom Skerritt does that golf thing at the beginning, which, by the way, Tom Skerritt's also in this. It's some of the worst green screen I've ever seen, where it's is this an internet reviewer green screen circa 2009 instead of like a major motion picture.
It does look like someone just put up a screensaver of Alaska behind them and did like a zoom acting bit and then just went in and polished up the edges.
Yeah.
Like it's
exactly.
pretty fucking terrible. Like it's pretty bad. The thing is, like, they really want it to be like, oh God, who is it? Oh, what is the mystery? What is the mystery? And I will be fair, they kind of set it up enough to be like, well, it's Gabriel Mott. Like, there's no question. Like, this is super stupid. But so once they get back, and then, spoiler, but Tom Skerritt starts poking around, you're like, oh no, it's Tom Skerritt. Like, there's no question.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily the most engaging mystery to where it's like we have one particular red herring, and there's only like one other character of much significance. Honestly,
Yeah,
'cause
but
even,
then like the Australian guy, like, who is this guy?
oh yeah, the one's just like, oh, I'm on the station,
Yeah.
nothing's wrong with me, and then, haha, I want the diamonds.
Yeah, like, what the fuck?
Which also, it just feels weird with like this movie. Maybe it's because of the expectation of the thing necessarily, but this is a movie that constantly feels like it's gonna make the twist of like it's a genre thing, like it's an
Yep.
alien or a monster or something like that. The way that just like it's attempting to shoot it and everything, and every single time it just ends up being like, oh no, it's a way less exciting twist on that. Like particularly that the big motivation for everybody is diamonds.
Russian uncut diamonds.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And the awful sort of the shit with them at the end where it's Gabriel Mott, Kate Beckinsale, and the Australian guy, and they're on the lines, like going back and forth, which feels like for fucking ever, by the way. The whole climax of this where they're on the lines and chasing each other through them. It's the most unexciting, air quote, thriller moment of the movie, and it takes forever. But it is the ultimate demise of the Australian guy is some of the worst special effects I've seen in a long time. Even in this movie.
A lot of, especially the over editing that they try and do around like them walking around outside with like the rope that they're clinging onto.
Oh, it lasts forever. That's the thing. This movie, what is it? An hour and 37, hour and 40, something like that.
Yeah.
It feels like almost double that. It is such a slog to get through. It took me a long time because I had to keep pausing it and getting up because I was like nodding off. I'm like, if I don't move around, I'm not going to be able to watch this. And yeah, it's pretty terrible.
Yeah, and especially with like you to go back to Beckinsale. I think with Beckinsale, I agree she doesn't have necessarily a huge range, but when she's utilized well, like in those underworld movies, I would argue she's a lot of fun. Even this, like I could see a world where she could handle being like U.S. Marshal on a base thing like this role in a better context. It's just the trouble of like they don't even give her the opportunity to attempt to do anything because like even at her worst, because I agree she doesn't have a lot of range, but like I've seen her try and fail, but at least like spectacularly. Like I just want to shout this out because one, we don't have a lot to say about this fucking movie, but speaking of completely forgettable movies, I was one of like 5 people who saw The Disappointments Room in a theater. Which, if you don't know, was this movie that like came out in 2016, bombed horribly. It had like a $900,000 like opening weekend.
Is that the one with Ben Kingsley as well?
No, not Ben Kingsley. It's like her and Lucas Till is also in it. It was the second movie written by Wentworth Miller, who had done Stoker previously.
Right, I'm thinking of Stonehurst Asylum, which is also another Beckinsale one.
Right, but this movie, like, there's a scene that was at least in the theatrical cut that I saw, in which she has to like attempt to do like a party thing for like a bunch of neighbors that come in, but she is like a drunken mess. And it is like some of the most over-the-top wailing acting, which, by the way, is not in any version of the movie that was released on home video, apparently. I am like one of 5 people who has seen this scene, which I'm almost convinced, because like I was doing a horror podcast at that time, and I'm almost convinced that like me railing about that fucking movie and that scene in that podcast convinced them to edit it out of the movie.
I mean, maybe.
It's a bummer, because it's the best scene of the whole fucking movie, because she's going like over the top and big and dramatic in a way that's just like, well, this is memorable. If she had done at least one bit of that in Whiteout, I would have had something to talk about related to Whiteout.
Right, I agree. Like I said, she doesn't have a lot of range. She can be capable of leading like an underworld and stuff like that. But in this, they just don't give her anything to do except, hey, by the way, like your first 3 minutes on screen, get in your real tight underwear and get in the shower. Yeah. And you're like, well, okay. This is fucking dumb. And then have a will they, won't they with pretty much every male character in that thing. Like, all right, it just doesn't work. It cheapens anything they're trying to do. And then, like I said, and even her past, where her partner was going to betray her to the drug lord, it's so fucking stupid. It's so stupid. And then they have a whole scene where she's flashing back to literally the attack that happened right before the scene. Like where she's attacked when she first gets to the one base, and then it's showing it in flashbacks, and she wakes up because she was having a nightmare about it.
Right. There's a similar thing also where like they piece together once they arrive at the crashed plane about like, oh, this is what happened here, and it looks like this and this happened. And we see footage from the opening, and it's like,
Yeah.
why do we even have that opening? Like, you could have just had this opening take place like here.
Right, I agree. In the
30 minutes in.
flashbacks. Yeah, in the flash. Because when the movie started, I swear to God, when it started, it was like a Russian plane, and it's completely in Russian, and I was like, shit, am I watching the wrong movie? I literally had to pause it and check. Like, this isn't what I've heard about this movie, because it's just so out of left field and doesn't fit with any of the rest of the movie.
Yeah. It's very weird. But yeah, like, I will say probably the most memorable thing that actually happens in this movie for me is the fact that for Beckinsale, who I think sells this element of it, there's a point where she gets attacked and then her hands end up being frostbitten because of the way they're handled, and then Tom Skerritt has to, like, snap them off. And I'll give it credit for, like, that's something I didn't expect for this movie, that our actress would end up having 8 fingers all the way from, like, the midway point to the end of it.
Yeah, and that scene where she pulls away from the wheel is brutal, where you see the skin peeling off on her hand.
Yes.
Like, that is brutal. That's probably the only moment, that and the actual finger chopping, but are the only moments of the movie where I was like, ooh, fuck, ooh. The rest is just kind of like bland. And like I said, Gabriel Mott, wow, is he bad. He is so, so, so bad. Like, right. I want to say The Spirit was before this, or maybe right after.
It was right before this, because that was like December 2008. So that's
right,
like
and then this came out, and it's like a 1-2 punch of this guy is not a bankable movie star.
Yeah, so then he went off to Suits.
Suits, and then like he did like either the second or third direct-to-DVD sequel of SWAT and stuff like that. So, I mean, he's fine there. He can stay there.
Right, because the thing is with that dude, like, his introduction scene, I told you, is like one of the most baffling things I've ever seen. Because, like, so much of it, his face is not on camera for his dialogue. It is 90% like either the back of his head, maybe a double, or his dialogue over, like, close-ups of Kate Beckinsale. And it's so bizarre. It's like, to the degree that I almost thought, like, is he dubbed? Like, what's going on with this? What's happening here? After that point, he has, like, much more, like, on camera, like, actual moving his mouth time. But this introduction scene is just, like, bizarre to the degree I'm just like, was this, like, heavily redubbed and reshot or whatever? Because I don't get what the fuck's happening here.
He's so boring. There's zero sort of chemistry. Actually, I think that's one of the main problems of the movie, too. Even if a bad movie, if there's chemistry between all the different actors, it would work. I mean, I guess Beckinsale and Skerritt might have the most chemistry, but it's just compared to everybody else's complete lack.
Yeah, and even then, it's the chemistry of two people who are like, we're probably better than this, right?
Yeah, we're both better than this. Like, we are better than this, right? Yeah. I was an alien and picket fences, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, like, it feels like the scenes between the two of them, they're the most earnest they feel throughout the whole movie is when they're both talking about, like, you gonna leave? Yep. I'm gonna leave. Oh, good. I want to leave too. I want to get the hell out of here, right? Yeah, I want to leave too. It's just like, yep, I get it from you two actors. I can get why you would want to leave.
I know, I fucking did. I'm in my own house.
I would rather go into the real cult than watch any more of this CG.
I'd rather, you gotta figure, it's January in Michigan. It's cold out. I'd rather walk outside with no coat on than like sit here and watch this fucking thing.
Just like Tom Skerritt at the end of the movie with his like brilliant thing, where it's like, oh, it turns out he was behind everything. So he was like, I know I'm not gonna make it out there, so I'm gonna take one last stroll outside. It's like his weird like suicide. Mm-hmm. Just like, okay.
I know, and she's like, yeah, okay, good. Well, how are you gonna explain that now? So great, good for you. By the way, this guy's associate tried to kill everyone. But, yeah, all right. No, he needs the redemption moment. Yeah, it's just, like I said, it's not that long of a movie, but I know I'm struggling if I pause a movie for the littlest excuse. Like, thought I heard something in the other room, like, oh, I'll go see if that was one of my cats. Oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'll sit down and pet it for 5 minutes. Like, I just got to move.
Jehovah's Witness came by and you're just like, yes, please tell me everything.
Yes, please come in. Yes, absolutely. What is Latter-day Saints? Explain to me in detail. But yeah, it's just, this is definitely going to be one of those that we run into Not all the time, but frequently enough on the show where it's ultimately its biggest sin is that it's just so forgettable.
Right, where it wouldn't be like one of the worst movies we cover necessarily because we will not remember it by the
Yeah,
time we do our episode next week.
it's not bad enough to be offensive. It's just bad enough to be forgettable.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of why I get why it was not very successful when it came out. Made
Big shocker.
$17.8 million on its $35 million budget. So it was not necessarily a big, wild, crazy hit. And I think, yeah, it just shows that, like, with the graphic novel element we mentioned, like, just because you have that and even, like, the Beckinsale, where it almost feels like the movie in its advertising is trying to tease, like, oh, this could be very underworldy. Because Kate Beckinsale wasn't really in. This was the same year as Rise of the Lycans, which she has only like a small cameo in of those underworld movies.
The third one? The third one?
Yes, right.
Oh, right. And it's like flashback cameos. It's not even like a new footage. I think it's footage from the first two.
Right. Because she was too busy doing stuff like this. We're just like, yeah look, I'm
good
going to try something a bit different. And it's like, well, I'm going to scurry back over for part 4.
Oh, don't forget,
Right
she also did Click in the meantime.
Click was a bit earlier. That's like 2006. So that's around the time of like the second Underworld.
Well, that's still whatever, terrible movie. But
a more memorable terrible movie.
I'd rather talk about Click than Whiteout. You know what? Let's just talk about Click. So, anyways, Click. The plot is
December 2006.
Adam Sandler falls asleep in bed, bouncing behind, right? And then he wakes up and it's Christopher Walken, and he's crazy. Turns out he's deaf. Whoa! Yeah, Whiteout is.
Yeah.
It was a rough one. Like I said, I knew watching it as soon as I put it on. I mean, it fits the bill. It's a bad, snowy suspense movie. But unfortunately, I wish it was more of a memorable bad. And I think I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah, it's just there's not much to really say very positively or extremely negatively, just generally negatively about it. But like Beckinsale and Tom Skerritt are there; they're earning paychecks, and most everything else about this movie is very poorly done, but in a way that it's like very one ear out the other kind of bad movie, where it's just like I'm not remembering scenes as they pass by me. Basically, because there's nothing really compelling or interesting, and even with the snowy suspense of it all, because the snow looks so bad and poorly put together and fake, you don't really get that sense of atmosphere, and you don't really get that sense of isolation for any of these people. It just feels very dull and unremarkable, and not, worth your time.
Agreed.
But, Adam, let's go talk about a movie I think we'll have more to say about in general, in detail, with Ravenous.
I'm sending you to California, Fort Spencer.
We have 4 missing soldiers, Captain, and no bodies. We need a supportable explanation.
Captain John Boyd is out to solve a mystery, but he is about to discover something he never imagined.
Winged eagle.
Man eats the flesh of another.
Now, one man must choose
We need others.
between having dinner
Not me.
and being dinner.
Good gracious. Eat to live. Don't live to eat.
Ravenous.
Bon appetit.
So Ravenous came out on March 19th, 1999, and was a movie that I picked as a good pick, but I had not seen this before, and I had heard just very weird, interesting elements of this, because this was also a movie that didn't do very well. It cost $12 million, made about $2 million in 1999, one of the big movie years, got very much overcrowded. But, watching it now, I completely get why this was not commercially successful, hot take. This doesn't seem like much of a crowd pleaser.
There's no market where this movie would be successful.
No, not at all.
Like, it's just,
If you're unaware of this movie, which I know most people probably would be since it's a bit more obscure, basically this takes place around the time of the Mexican-American War, and we follow our main character, Captain John Boyd, who has just been awarded like a big, congressional honor for the military after capturing a fort from the Mexican army, but it turns out he did so by being a coward and then really like playing dead, being hauled off with a bunch of corpses, and then surprise, ambushing everybody. So his superior is like, you know what? We're not going to execute you like we should because you're a coward. But instead, we're going to go ahead and give you a promotion and then force your ass all the way to California, which at this time in American history is kind of like desolate. There's really not much of anything especially in the winter. When this takes place. It's mainly, he goes over to the Skeleton Crew outpost, where there's a couple people that are there, and they're just kind of like, yeah, we meander and kind of like dwindle away our time, just kind of like keeping up things and kind of surviving. We don't do much else except occasionally help whoever might pass by. And that happens when this random stranger, played by Robert Carlyle, shows up freezing and like nearly naked, and they warm him back up, and he's like, I was part of an expedition crew that went out into the woods, and we got lost, and, I was trying to help everybody, but they ended up eating each other, basically, so there's this cannibalism element going on, and I had to, eat some of the scraps that were left over just to survive to some degree after we'd eaten our dog and like whatever animals had scurried by and we were starving. And so I know there's a couple people up there though who are still probably there, and everyone's like, you know what, let's go and have a rescue mission. Let's save these people that are in this cave out in the woods. And this Robert Carlyle joins all of them, including like Guy Pearce and most of the other people in the troop. And when they arrive, they realize this is an ambush. From Robert Carlyle, who turns to be a crazy cannibal man who has weird, vague powers because he's eaten people. And the movie only gets weirder from there.
Yeah, it's a fucking wild ride, dude. This movie is such a weird, strange little thing. Just from the sort of acting choices that are made here, the plot, the score is fucking nuts.
Yeah.
Like, I love it, though. It's one thing that people either love it or hate it. I kind of love it because it's so bizarre. Like, what is happening?
Shout out, by the way, the score composed by both Michael Nyman, who is a traditional classical composer, and Damon Albarn from Blur and the Gorillaz.
That makes sense.
There are a lot of points where, like, a little bit of, like, score that's, like, sort of Casio keyboard would play. I'm like, is fucking Clint Eastwood about to start?
Mm-hmm. Like when Carlisle starts chasing the one guy, the other religious guy, and it's playing like an old school like like an old banjo, like let's have fun and jamboree. Like it's fucking wild. But I do want to mention most of the supporting cast. I do love Guy Pearce. I think Robert Carlyle, we'll get into it a little bit more, but I think he's one of the like not mentioned great villains of this era. Like I think he's fucking great. He's just chewing the scenery. Not to be silly, but
for this movie, how dare you?
Yeah. Also a really good, like, small role from David Arquette. Like I think he's really fun in it. I think Neil McDonough's really good.
Yes.
Our guy from Virtuosity, who I hated in Virtuosity, but here he's Major Knox. I really like him too.
Right, yeah, Steven Spinella. He's pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good. Everybody really works. Even, I don't want to say, okay, fuck it. Jeffrey Jones, even though he's a horrible piece of shit, fuck that guy.
Horrible piece of shit, fuck that guy, terrible, awful person.
Still a good performance.
That's the bummer. That guy is, like, while he's an awful, awful piece of shit, he's a very good character actor.
Yeah, but a horrible, horrible piece of fucking shit.
Yes, for sure, yes. But yeah, no, I agree. Like, the ensemble that's created here, I think, is really interesting, especially earlier on when we get, like, the weird, like, how they pass their time at this fucking, like, nothing of an outpost, where it's just, like David
Knox
Arquette
drinks.
Knox drinks out. David Arquette smokes, like, the loco weed, as they call it.
Yeah, so it's probably peyote or something.
Right. That's some form of that, yeah.
Jeffrey Jones reads and eats walnuts.
And Guy Pearce is just stewing in his own hatred of just like, oh God, why am I here? I hate being here so much.
He's in pure misery. He wants to be dead so bad.
Yes.
And then Neil McDonough is just constantly alpha mailing. But yeah, I'm really glad you liked it, because I was definitely curious. I kind of knew. I'm like, this movie's too weird for Thomas not to like. Like, it's so crazy. It's such a weird, dark comedy, but there's genuine moments of, like, stomach churning, like, oh God, fucking gross. And it's just filled with really good performances.
Well, yeah, but I'll say this. It was an interesting experience watching at least this first time, because there wasn't a lot of, like, laugh out loud moments for me, or moments that I just was, because, like, often when I watch one of these movies, I will either, like, laugh really loud or have, like, oh my God, what the fuck is this kind of thing. I was just kind of, like, sitting there in stunned silence, just like, this happens?
Right. Yeah, no. Right. And it's one of those ones in hindsight. Now, if you watch it again, you'll probably chuckle. But it's
Right.
just because who the fuck knows what kind of movie you're getting into with this one? It's one of those where like I don't. This is wild. But I do want to go back to the sort of the Carlisle of it all because I want to say this is like he wasn't really big yet. Like I don't think
he'd been in Train Spotting, which I would argue put him at least on a lot of radars.
Yeah, a lot of radars, but like this is pre Full Monty, pre his James Bond movie he did.
No, I believe this is the same year as The World Is Not Enough. So this is around that same time. Yes.
Okay.
He's a genuinely very good character actor.
Yeah, he's a great
he
character.
never gets enough like praise, especially in this movie. He is a fucking maniac.
He is a fucking maniac. Well, they're all in the cave, and he's doing that weird shit with his hands where he's like pointing and going, ha, 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 and like walking back and forth and digging, and then doing it again and then digging. You're like, what is he doing?
He's a fucking feral animal. It's so weird, and he has to play so many different facets because initially when he's like discovered and he's like warmed up and he's like, oh, I have so many horrible things. You believe that PTSD?
Yeah, he tells him I'm a man of God. Oh my God, I had to eat, blah, and you're like, ugh.
Right, you believe all of that like PTSD there. Then he turns into a wild fucking animal for like the middle of the movie. And then later on, after like Guy Pearce is like, okay, I'm gonna get out of this. I had to eat a bit of Neil McDonough, but that's fine. I'll keep going. And then when he gets back, it's just like, oh hey, look, we have a new general who's gonna come in and take Jeffrey Jones's place. Oh look, it's General Ives. It's fucking him.
Distinguished gentleman, Colonel Ives.
Right, just like, hello, yes, please, I'm here to serve, and I respect authority and everything's like, oh god. Like, the way that Guy Pearce crumbles, I would do the exact same thing, just like, oh god, no.
He falls into the wall and cowers like a dog.
Yes.
Like, he's like, I'm done. Oh, fuck, this is insane.
And the amazing speech that he gives at a certain point where he's just like, I thought you would have had a bit more, but I know you have that hunger, don't you? You really want to feast on him, don't you? It's just like, oh, fuck.
Oh, when he's outside, before he fucking mortally wounds him and forces him to eat.
Yes.
Major Knox stew. Just so fucking gross, too. But the thing about Guy Pearce, I've always liked Guy Pearce. In this, he's good. He's, quotes, the lead, but he doesn't, to me, have as much to do as a lot of the other characters. But I think it kind of works in that way where you just kind of see this guy in this one facet of his life who has to go through this crazy thing, who's just like, I'm done, dude. He's so done with life at this point.
He very much feels kind of like a, sort of like a blank slate as well for like the audience. Where, like I said, if I went through all this shit, I would also be like cowering and like shriveling up. And the way that he especially goes from like disheveled but like healthy to like on death's door by like near the end of the movie when he's like being forced to eat and he's just like, oh man, that guy looks like he's dead. He's being like propped up like fucking Weekend at Bernie's. He's not even.
No, right. He's a mannequin, man.
Yeah.
Also, too, one of my favorite bits, I do like the ending fight between Carlisle and Pearce. It is brutal. Like, it's brutal. Those guys fucking hack each other to pieces. But I love the bear trap moment of Robert Carlyle. that was sneaky, and laughs.
Right. That he's almost just like, oh, touche. Well done.
If you die first, I'm definitely going to eat you. You're like, oh my god, this is fucking insane.
But if I die first, are you going to eat me?
That's the question.
Right.
It laughs and it dies.
But I mean, the big moment for Guy Pearce, of course, in this movie, at least his character, is that fucking fall. That feels like something out of Hot Rod.
I know. And then with the bone out of the leg.
Because like the big, like, all the lead up to that, where it's just like he's gonna face off against Robert Carlyle. He's like, what are you gonna do? You already tried to shoot me and I just got back up like I'm the fucking Terminator. What are you gonna do? He's like, you know what? Nope. And I'm gonna take my chances with the cliff.
I'm just jumping off a cliff.
He jumps off, hits every single branch of a tree on his way down, and then rolls, and then hits Neil McDonough's body, who has been stabbed and like fallen over. And then they both like tumble into like a little crevice where, as you mentioned, his leg has been horribly hurt to the point where like the bones protruding out. And Neil McDonough's still alive briefly, and then eventually dies, but has that creepy look on his face.
It's so scary.
His death mask is so upsetting.
Yeah, it's so upsetting. Yeah, that too, though. Even when I watched this the first time and watching it again this time, I've seen this movie several times now. But when Neil McDonough comes back alive and chokes him, I've always, like, obviously it's really happening, but it's one of those where, like, how? This is so fucking crazy. Like, why is he alive again and choking him? Like, what is happening?
I mean, there's a lot of that. Even, like, Robert Carlyle is the one where just, like, that dude is constantly, like, getting up because they establish, like, they connect us to, like, the Wendigo, because we didn't mention there's a couple, like, Native American folks who were on there. Like, George, played by Joseph Running Fox, and Martha, the one female, played by
Yeah.
Sheila Tusi. And they briefly bring up the idea of like the Wendigo, which is something that's also been, I think, brought up a lot more recently in like sort of genre stuff.
Yeah, like Antlers does it and stuff like that.
Right. But from what I understand, at least, and keep in mind, I have a very limited cursory knowledge of looking at the Wikipedia article for Wendigo. This, at least, apparently is a bit closer to the legend in terms of like the whole like, oh, there's like a big antler monster thing or whatever, is not part of the original legend. Like the legend is more like a werewolf thing, basically. Where it's like they kind of mentioned here, where it's like whoever basically eats and consumes flesh will become like a monster that will strive to turn others.
Yes, and Wendigo was originally an Incredible Hulk villain, yet was the villain in the first appearance of the Wolverine.
Right, I'm sure where it originated, and there's no other, like the Native
Nope,
American
that's
stuff
what it
not
is.
really
They stole it from us. No, but yeah, that's exactly what it is. Like you just eat the flesh and you take on the man's power. And then I think, if I remember right, they added like the regenerative, sort of capabilities and stuff like that. But that's fine. Who gives a shit?
It ends up becoming more like cannibalism is kind of like a vampirism thing, which is where I kind of came up with the idea of if you are a fan of, if you've seen Bones and All out there in the audience, this is basically like Bones and All's weird, funny Gen X father. That's what this movie fucking feels like. He's just like, there's a lot of like the connecting threads of like the dirtiness and that kind of vampirism to cannibalism element with this, but this is like the much goofier version of that, as opposed to like Bones and All looks at their dad Ravenous, just like, Dad, you're so like silly, and I'm a much more like edgy, fucked up movie. Although for the record, that movie's great, but it's like there's a lot of connecting DNA between the two, I would say.
Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, I just love like you said, Robert Carr's whole speech where he tells him like, I had tuberculosis. I was coughing up damn near a pint of blood a day, and now and then he just takes this big drag off that rolled cigar. This is batshit insane. And then him painting the cross on his forehead in blood before they fight. Like, why? What the fuck? The Jeffrey Jones throat slicing scene is really upsetting.
And then also the fact that Jeffrey Jones shows back up, I was genuinely surprised by. Like, we get a couple flashes of, like, something moving around. I'm like, oh, is Robert Carlyle, like, moving really fast? And it's like, oh, no, that twist, I did not see that coming, like, at all.
Oh, and when you first see him and he's covered in dried blood all around the mouth and stuff, like, it's so, like, oh, God. Like, what have they been doing? You know what I mean? Like, it's so fucked up. Yeah, I didn't see that twist the first time I saw it either. And I remember thinking when I first saw it, I was like, oh, this is kind of dumb. But I was also, young and dumb. But now I'm like, it's a pretty well-earned, like, whoa, what the fuck is happening here? Like, it doesn't feel just like a plot device. Because, yeah, you see Jeffrey Jones get stabbed and get the tomahawk to the back, but then that's it. You don't see him again. You don't see him actually die. You don't see anything. And then the only thing you see is Carlisle dragging the one kid into the cave. And that's all you get.
Right, yeah, I think that works because, like, I think if any of the other people had come back, there'd be almost a thing of like, well, this is Wendigo regenerative power really working, but they sell like Jeffrey Jones's death.
Oh yeah, he's dying. Oh yeah,
where it looks like just like that guy's not gonna get back up, and it's like, no, he's like healthy and like lively and is just like able to move around so well. Like I think that's the thing, is that they sell so much of like the brutal stuff that happens earlier to the degree that when it gets much more supernatural by the like conclusion of the movie, you do totally believe it. But at the same time, it's all while keeping, like, some of this weird, like, silly tone to it. Like, I love how, like, at the end of this movie, where, like, that happens with, like, the bear trap and they both get hit, the, like, ending button of this is Martha looking in, seeing them both in the bear trap dead, and is like, no. And then she just
Fuck that. Yep, fuck that. But in a way, too, you get it, because she's like, I'm not putting, because I don't want any of these guys to, like, live. So I'm just walking out so they can die. Fuck them.
Right, and plus you also get the sentiment that at least like earlier on, like they do a great job of like selling at least the small relationship stuff with them, with her and David Arquette. He's the only one that she gives a shit about. And the moment he dies, she has no emotional investment in this at all.
Well, yeah, you got to figure, because it was like her, George, and David Arquette's character were like a three-piece. Like all they did was hang out and get stoned together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like that element too with like the George and Martha characters, where like they sell the fact that they aren't just like necessarily stereotypes. They're just like, well, we're here because like we have nowhere else to go, because I don't know, westward expansion has destroyed like our homes basically, so we'll hang out with these people. And then even when like Guy Pearce is trying to question her about like, is there any way to stop the Wendigo? Is there anything we can do? And she's like, dude, no. There's no fucking thing you can do. You gotta give yourself over. Okay, I'm tired of all of you.
Yeah, like, it's
you guys
done,
killed
bro.
my brother, and you killed David Arquette. I have nothing. Fuck off.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And how good, like, this Major Knox, what a fucking moron he is. I mean,
Yeah.
it could be him, but I mean, the man had a beard. Like, you fucking idiot. He's so drunk.
And I love that too. How like they sell the gaslighting element, where like the only where that trickery element, where like that he's able to that Robert Carlyle is able to trick everybody by the fact that the only person who would recognize him who's alive at this point is the drunk, because they established like David Arquette and Martha went off to go get supplies earlier. And then, like, the Knox is once again a drunk, so it's like there's no one who's going to be able to prove Guy Pearce's side of the story.
Right, but but they have that major moment where you're like, oh shit, they got him. You know what the Major Knox? You said you struck him in the shoulder, but there'd be a wound, wasn't there? And there's nothing. It's great. It's fucking great.
Yeah, they do a really good job, especially also of like selling that like Guy Pearce believes in this so well, but also he's been so off the bend and he has eaten a bit of Neil McDonough at this point that you're like, is he fucking crazy? Is that actually the twist of this? That he's like fucking nuts? They give you at least enough of that like weird thing until Robert Carlyle like fully unmasked, just like, nah, it's me. You were right. Fuck you. I'm here.
Yeah, until that speech outside. With that night, I think, where he goes outside where they find David Arquette. It's that night where he's outside and he confronts him outside. And he's just giggling at him and laughing at him gleefully. It's like, oh, he got you, man. You're fucked. The thing that works best about Robert Carlyle, I think, in this movie too, and pretty much any other time he's played a villain, because like I said, he's really good at it. He's such a little guy. Like, he's not a big guy. He's short. He's real skinny. But there's just something about him. I don't know if it's his eyes, because his eyes are really sort of haunting. They're deep brown, almost black. But there's just something about him that just really is kind of off-putting and intimidating.
He kind of has like the version of sort of like Wolverine you hear about in the comics, where he's like a small guy, but he has all this like pent up like wiry energy that really works. Like that's what works to me about him in like Trainspotting, where you see him with like everybody in that group, and you're like, oh, he's like one of the guys. It's fine. And then as that movie goes along, I'm like, oh no, he's way more. Like,
he is a unhinged maniac. Yeah, he's literally a hair away at all times from just snapping.
Right, and I think that's what's so interesting also, given we haven't talked much about the production of this movie, but apparently this went through all sorts of weird shit, where there was an original director, Milcho Malchevisk, and did 3 weeks of shooting, but he wanted to do like new storyboards, and the production company Fox 2000, which was the part of Fox that used to do like a lot of these kind of like lower tier budget kind of indie movies that were financed through them, apparently had like a lot of disagreements with him, and eventually that guy left. And what I love, and I can't believe this, like, they were going to put in as this replacement director, Raja Gosnell, who was an editor previous to this of, like, the Home Alone movies, had directed Home Alone 3, and would go on to do, like, the Scooby-Doo movies and Smurfs 1 and 2. Like, he almost directed this movie.
Oh my god. Like, what?
and the cast revolted against that. So then Robert Carlyle recommended Antonia Bird, who apparently they had worked together on a lot of things, and she ended up directing the movie, but said that a lot of these same conflicts with like the studio happened throughout. So basically she said that like, no, I don't think it was the first director's fault. I just think like the studio was constantly trying to like rework things, and so like there was a lot of studio meddling. We've talked about that plenty of times, like studio meddling kind of movies, where you can see it on the screen like, oh, it's terrible. And like in this case, I think you can see it, but also the movie's so weird that you almost can't tell if like, oh no, I think this makes sense for this movie. Like this weird sudden change with like the music or the performances or the tone, any of these things with this movie. I guess it makes sense because this movie's just like constantly weird enough, and yet has enough of a through line of a story where it's just like, sure, let's throw this. So it's a rare instance of studio meddling not hindering a production or anything, that confusion actually kind of helping it maybe.
Like I said, this movie is so fucking weird, man. I can't think of another movie that's kind of like Ravenous. Ravenous is definitely its own thing, and maybe the production bullshit lends to it being just this weird mismatch, like tonally kind of crazy movie. But I think that's what also endears it to me and makes it one that there's very few people that I know that have seen this who don't like it. Like, I know a friend of the show, Rafe Telch, did it on his show, and he liked it, but he hated the score. But he did like the movie. But it's just one of those movies that could only exist in this time. I mean, you might get away with making it again now, but I don't know. And also, it is unsellable, and I think that's why I love it too. Because there's nothing about this movie that, like, even you got to tell people who I've recommended to, like, just go in. I'm not going to tell you anything about it. Just, I think you'll like it. Watch it.
Yeah, because it's hard even from like the various different genre perspectives with this, because it's kind of a Western, it's kind of a war movie, it's kind of a horror movie, it's kind of a comedy. But I don't know how many of those subsections, like there's not a huge Venn diagram for this movie.
No, right. Yeah, there's no pie chart that breaks those things up equally. Like, you take the pie chart, put the colors, and then swirl them all around. It'd be this weird tie-dye thing. But, like, it's just a bunch of crazy shit. I guarantee you, even if you haven't seen it and you're listening to us talk about it, we're probably not describing it adequately enough for what you might take from it.
Right, yeah, it's a hard movie to even, like, even though we're describing things, like, there's just certain weird, bizarre details. Like, we haven't talked much about Jeremy Davies and his character, who's, like, the sort of religious person in the group.
Yeah, I love him in this. I love him.
Right, and he talks very quietly. He barely says anything up of a whisper. You barely hear in his dialogue. And, like, his fate is so bizarre where, like, Robert Carlo is about to kill him, and he's just, like, quivering there. And he has a gun he could use to shoot, but he's just, like, terrified. And Robert Carlo just, like, leans in and says, "Run." And then he runs, and then that banjo music plays.
Yep.
It's so fucking bizarre.
Well, just how disturbing he was licking me.
Right.
Like, that moment, you're like, oh, God, what the fuck? But in that moment, the Jeremy Davies character, like, oh, he was licking me. And then Neil McDonough comes in, and Jeremy Davies is like, yes, kill him, do it. Like, instantly, like, goodbye, man of God, kill this motherfucker.
Like, if anything, like, I think the closest we have to this in, like, a modern cinematic landscape is something like Robert Eggers with specifically The Lighthouse. The Lighthouse, I think, has a lot of similar weird tonal elements.
Yeah.
Where it'll go from, like, like, sort of, like, funny to horrific to, like, this grand, sweeping, epic kind of thing or whatever.
I actually think that's an apt comparison, even though they're no way similar plot-wise. But
right,
as
or
far
even,
as,
like,
as far as, like, to try to describe it to somebody, you kind of got to be like, just watch it.
Right, and the thing is, like, with Eggers, he has more of, like, a, like, sort of honed-in style that I think makes people sort of excuse that a bit more. It's like, well, it's in black and white, and it feels like this, like, very consistent vision of, like, one director, as opposed to this movie is so, like, weirdly piecemeal that I think that might also be a deterrent where even somebody who likes The Lighthouse would be like, well, this doesn't look like The Lighthouse and doesn't, like, feel like that same thing. But
I feel tonally it's very close. I think you're kind of hitting on something there.
Right, I think tonally as well, but I think that also lends us an interesting different element where, with the snowy element of it, I think because, like, this was made in 99, so it's pre, like, the digital age, I think this is, like, the last time you could have made a movie like this on film, actual, like, physical film, because it has, like, a completely different quality. Like, when they're going around the mountains, and you have that one bit where Jeremy Davies initially gets hurt, and he, like, falls down that fucking cliff, you feel, like, the claustrophobia, because you can tell that, like, oh, the film crew had to bring a giant-ass camera and canisters of film up a fucking mountain so they could film Jeremy Davies, like, falling over, because it's just expensive enough to look professional, but also not expensive enough to be more, oh, they could fake that mountain set. Like, nope, that's a real mountain that Jeremy Davies fell down part of.
It's funny, because I've kind of always thought of this, because I am a claustrophobe, not to the point where, like, some people are, but I don't like things over my head. I kind of have to have a window cracked in the car at all times, stuff like that. And I think this movie hits a notch that's not really necessarily talked about. Claustrophobia in wide open spaces is terrifying. And this movie does that. Like, they're on the mountains, they're in that fort, it's a big area, all that, but you still feel claustrophobic, like, oh my God, I can't escape. That's terrifying. When you can look out endless and you can't see anything.
Especially when it becomes more snowy to fit the topic of the show.
You have nothing but just white.
Also, the claustrophobia, like the bit where Neil McDonough and Guy Pearce go into the cave and Neil McDonough actually goes down, he discovers the bodies. Like, that's also terrifying from, like, a spelunking kind of attitude. Like, this almost feels like The Descent for me. Like, nope, I wouldn't go down there.
No way.
Nope.
No. That's maybe one of the reasons why this movie has kind of always stuck with me, too, to where I get pure enjoyment out of this movie because of the wackiness, but there's also that sense of dread every time I watch it. And I think, hey, I think we just talked something out here, and your check's in the mail.
If you want therapy, go over to doubleedgeddoublebill@gmail.com. Email. We'll have a session.
I got 3 more minutes. We haven't reached the hour mark yet.
Oh, that's true. Yes. So, please tell me about your mother.
I don't like her.
Well, we solved that.
You're right. Yeah, there you go. All right. So, anyways, I don't like anybody. I think that's part of why this movie has always stuck with me. I almost 100% positive I didn't see it at the show, but I know I saw it right away when it came out on home video because I really like Guy Pearce. I've liked him. I still like him. I champion him all the time. And so I'm like, oh, this looks fucking crazy and wild.
And it probably would have been on video like right around the same time as like Memento.
Exactly. I think Memento is the first time I saw Guy Pearce.
Most people,
like most people,
that,
yeah. And I remember Guy Pearce, Robert Kylo, David Arquette. It's him laughing while hitting the peace pipe. You get the idea, like maybe they're cannibals, maybe it's a vampire thing. Like the trailer's really like loose, but I think it has like a metal score, which is a big problem. But I'm like, all right, I gotta see
saying
this.
They were having a rough time trying to sell this movie, Adam?
Yeah, for sure. But I'm like, I gotta see this. So I rented it like right away. And I was just enamored instantly. I'm like, this is the weirdest shit I've ever seen. Like, what the fuck is this? This is definitely one of those, when it first came out, that I was showing to people because I was like 16, 17. And I was showing it to anybody who would want to watch it with me. I'm like, you got to see this weird movie. Like, I remember one night, this kid I barely knew was like, hey, have you ever seen Videodrome? You got to watch Videodrome. So I'm like, all right, we watch Videodrome. I'm like, that movie is weird. Have you seen Ravenous? He's like, no. So I put in Ravenous. He's like, that might have been weirder. Like, yeah, I know, because it's so fucking crazy. Because Videodrome is nuts, but it's got a fucking thorough plot line, which this one does too. But Videodrome follows a specific tone throughout, where this one, like we said, is all over the map. And yet you still are kind of there for the ride.
Yeah, and I think it's just because like while like it has like all these like weird elements, at the same time there is that basic kind of like you mentioned, like consistent kind of like dread and fascination with just like, I just gotta know how the fuck this keeps going, because this is already like, it starts off very odd with even like the opening bit of the Guy Pearce like getting his Congressional Medal of Honor, and the weird score where apparently with as weird as stuff from Auburn is in the score, Nyman apparently did a thing where like he got a bunch of like it's kind of like that orchestra where basically you have a bunch of people who either don't know instruments very well or are playing instruments they're not that familiar with to play like that opening bit with like the traditional like early American war hymns, and that makes a lot of sense because it sounds off-putting and weird in a way that fits for like, oh, he's in the middle of like this like military ceremony where like they're eating giant things of meat, but it's like disgusting and vile, and the whole military street is like such garbage. Like it's weird. It's an interesting kind of like anti-America movie as well. Or like by the end of it, where you have like the westward expansion element where they're talking about like, oh yeah, Manifest Destiny's going to bring a bunch of people over here and they're going to be searching for gold. We'll lead them to the gold pans. So it's just like, oh shit, we're going to just basically like take advantage of American greed to consume in our own right. I think that's another fascinating element to this, where it's just like, it's this big, colossal, like, and never-ending cycle of feeding frenzy, basically, from greed and stupidity and insane monstrousness. It feels, like the American dream.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah. The American dream. Oh, God. But no, you're 100% right about the score, too. Like, it's weird. It's like the almost like a presidential sort of march scored, yet there's some asshole playing a fucking bassoon and didgeridoo, like throwing it out there, or somebody banging on an oil drum. Yeah, it is really off-putting. But like I said, the score, it's really fucking cool, man. I love the opening score. The sort of the bing, 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 bing that kind of runs throughout the whole movie, because it's at first you're like, oh, this is really good, like, but depending on what scene it plays over, it takes like a sinister tone. Like, it's one of those that just really works. But
particularly the ending bit, like after like you see like the last shot of Guy Pearce and Robert Carlyle, that music that plays over the end credits is really good.
It's very good. It's very, very good. I agree.
But yeah, we've definitely talked about this movie much more than we have the other one. So let's go ahead
big shocker.
Our final thoughts about Ravenous, Adam.
Like I said, Ravenous is one of those that I've always liked since I've seen it. It's one that I can just occasionally throw on maybe every 2-3 years and still have a really good time. Like, I just rewatched this a couple nights ago for the show and I had a fucking blast. It's just, there's nothing really like it that I've seen. I just think it's super fun. I think it's a perfect time capsule movie in a weird way, but I also think it's bolstered by just great performances, particularly Robert Carlyle, like I said. It's just a weird, strange little movie that it's so hard to sort of pigeonhole and recommend and describe what it is, that it also has a very like this is my movie feeling. Like this movie is special because only but it belongs to me. It's so cool. Like, not to take on that, like, oh, you're a poser if you like Ravenous sort of fucking mentality, because that's
It's
not
like,
what I'm
I am the
saying.
gatekeeper of Ravenous.
Yeah,
And
none
you
of
must
that.
go
I'm
through
not
me in order to
I'm
like
right.
him.
I'm not trying to gatekeep Ravenous, but it's a movie that's designed in such a way that it feels like it belongs to you, because who the hell else are you going to recommend and show this to? It's just so crazy and bizarre, but I love it, and I strongly recommend it to anybody who's maybe not necessarily deep into like horror genre films or anything like that. But if you're on the cusp, or you like maybe dark comedies or just weird cinema, then I definitely think this is one that I would throw to you.
Yeah, like I said, if you're a kid who likes the Bones and All and the Robert Eggers pictures, I think this would be up your alley, I would say. Because that's the thing, is like, this movie feels like, it's interesting where you mentioned the time capsule element. I think the biggest thing that sort of dates it in 1999 for me, even more than like the film element or like the cast or any of that other stuff, is like the fact that this is a movie that like got $12 million is fucking baffling. Like, in this modern climate, where like, if a movie vaguely like this were to get any money, it would be kind of like The Lighthouse, which I believe only had like, it had like a much smaller budget than even that. Like, where like this would be much more of like an A24 sort of like weird horror movie, as opposed to like what this is. And the fact that it got, like I said, $12 million in 1999 to be able to do that is still like crazy. All right, to be fair, Lighthouse, $11 million budget, but still, that's for 2019, as opposed to like with inflation, this movie's actually like what, like 25 million now? No way it gets that much
Right?
money.
Yeah, not gonna happen. No way.
Right, for sure. But yeah, still at the same time, like, that's what makes it so like fascinating, with like all the weird tonal shift elements. It's really great and very bizarre cast. It's all this like very bizarre, fascinating packaging that won't be for everybody, but I'm glad it kind of has at least a bit of that like cult status, because I had heard about this movie for a while. It's just like, oh, you know what's an underrated gem? Ravenous, really grand underrated gem. And having finally seen it, yeah, I'm part of that camp. Just like, it's a very fun, weird, underrated gem of a movie that I would recommend to certain freaks out there like us. But now, Adam, let's get into our weekly segment, the Double Redo.
With the best theme song ever.
Double Redo.
Double redo. Double redo. Double redo. Double redo. Double redo.
That works. Ah, that theme song. We love it so much.
Ooh. Did Chuck Berry do that? Oh, it's so bad.
His cousin Marvin Berry had Michael
Marvin,
J. Fox here.
you know that terrible sound you've been looking for?
Looking for? Well, listen to
this.
We're here to talk about our weekly segment, The Double Redo, in which every week Adam and I recommend a good and a bad movie related to the topic in question. So each of us has a good and a bad choice for snowy suspense in this case. And Adam, you're going first. What are your choices for the snowy suspense double redo?
All right, man. So for my good, I have one that I feel like I've talked about in the show before, and if I haven't, I apologize, because it's great. At least for me, it's one that the trailer was one of the most exciting trailers I've seen in a long time when it came out. And what I'm talking about is the adaptation of the Steve Niles comic, 30 Days a Night, which, if you want to talk about a movie that makes sort of the darkness and the snow its own force, like, this definitely is that. I think it's probably one of the more original sort of vampire type movies that have come out in a long time, where they're not super romantic. There's no sort of alluring aspect about them. I think they're just these savage beasts that literally like gnaw on people like they're sharks in a frenzy. I think it's a really cool movie. Like, is it a 5 out of 5? No, of course not. But I think it's really kind of well shot. I think David Slade is a pretty good director, and this was like a really good outing from him. In particular, the one shot of where it's almost like a helicopter shot or an overhead shot of the vampires sort of attacking all the sort of villagers, or whatever you want to call townspeople. I think Ben Foster's really crazy and weird in it. Probably my favorite Danny Houston, next to another movie that it's a really, really cool, dark, violent vampire movie that has a pretty fun cast too. Like I said, not the greatest movie you ever see, but certainly if you haven't seen it, I think it's a really interesting take on vampires. And then for my bad, I had a movie that I just watched pretty recently, I'd say within the last like 3 to 6 months. It's called Deadfall. It's like this weird crime thriller that has an incredible cast behind it. I mean, it's Eric Bana, Olivia Wilde, Charlie Hunnam, Chris Christopherson, Sissy Spacek, Kate Mara, Treat Williams. I mean, it just kind of goes on and on and on. And ultimately, what it lends itself to be is just a story that gets away from them. You can tell. It's supposed to be like a crime thriller starring Eric Bana and Olivia Wilde as a brother and sister. Maybe there's incest there. Maybe they're not actually brother and sister, but they're criminals that like robbed a bank and then like they have to split up. Charlie Hunnam finds Olivia Wilde and they get romantically involved, and Eric Bana comes looking for her. Like this whole fucking convoluted yet simple thing, but they tried too much to make the parts that inherently wouldn't be interesting, and it just really falls flat on its face, unfortunately, especially with that cast. And anytime Eric Bana really like sort of tries to chew it up as a villain, he's fun. Like in this, he's the best in it. But the rest of it is just really, really doesn't work. And it takes place in I forget where, but it's a horrible snowstorm, and Eric Bana gets lost. He gets frostbite, that type of shit.
Yeah, I haven't seen your bad pick of Deadfall, though when you messaged to me initially, I was confused and thought, wait, is this the Nicolas Cage movie where he looks like Tony Clifton? But different Deadfall. You're talking about the 2012 Deadfall, as opposed to the 1993 Deadfall.
Correct.
Where all those weird Nicolas Cage clips come from. But I have seen 30 Days of Night. I like aspects of it. I think it's David Slade who directed it, and I think there's some like stylistic stuff that's fun in that movie. And I do agree Danny Houston, I think, is quite good as that version of the vampire. I just have the problem, like, I really don't give a single fuck about like any of those characters in that movie. I think like the townspeople, they try and do like a Carpenter thing where you're like, oh, you get like a sense of the town and who these people are, and then like everything gets barricaded. And they feel like so paper thin. It doesn't have like, I'm not a huge fan of like Josh Hartnett or Melissa George in general, and I think they're kind of whatever. There's other people like Ben Foster, who I is very hit or miss for me. Sometimes I think he's an amazing actor. Sometimes I think he's just here to feed himself on scenery kind of thing. And I think this is more the latter, honestly, in this case. But yeah, it's not a bad movie, I would agree. I think it's a decent watch. It doesn't really leave like a huge impression on me beyond like Danny Houston, especially the bit where he confronts somebody and they're like begging for like, please God, and he's like, no God, and then eats them. That's a really fun moment. There's fun moments throughout,
that's the moment that sold the trailer. I mean, honestly.
Right. Yes, that was also in the trailer a lot for sure. Yes, but overall, yeah, it's I think it's more of a mixed bag to me. I'm not as quite in your positive camp with that one.
So, do you want me to messenger you Instagram message or email you my resignation letter?
I mean, I'll accept it in audio form here, I guess. Goodbye.
No. I'm going to write, you know what, on parchment, and I'll send it to you with a wax seal. That's just a middle finger.
Great. So I guess we'll be still doing the show for at least another 3 weeks until that gets here by carrier pigeon.
It's the U.S. Postal Service. We got at least a
month. Right. Exactly. But yeah. But it's time for me to do my double redo choices here for Snowy Suspense. So a good pick I have is another one where there's a couple, like actually both these movies have like a weird thing where there's two different movies that are called by its particular title. But the first one I'm talking about is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo from 2011, which was the one directed by David Fincher, starring Daniel Craig and Rooney Mara. And this is one movie that like I revisited fairly recently this week, just because I'm like, well, I haven't seen it since the theater, and I was kind of lukewarm about it when I initially saw it in the theater, especially because I was such a huge fan of at least Noomi Rapace in the first versions of these movies. And I will say I think it shot up a lot more when I revisited it recently. If you're unaware, this is like the stuff with Elizabeth Salander, who is this character that like is this private investigator who does a lot of hacking stuff, but it mainly follows Daniel Craig as this journalist who has gotten some hot water for making some accusations about somebody that he's not revealing necessarily the sources and whatnot. So he goes off into hiding after he gets an invitation from this guy who's part of this big rich family that owns like a lot of publishing companies and like a big fertilizing plant and some other stuff, who's played by Christopher Plummer, who hires him to investigate about the decades-long disappearance of his sister, It's been going on since like the 60s. She disappeared, and he wants Daniel Craig to try and find her. And while Daniel Craig's on that case on his own, we also follow the Elizabeth Salander character, who has been awarded the state, and she has a new guardian of the state who was recently had a stroke, and so now she has an even newer guardian who does horrible things and blackmails her, and she gets her vengeance in a very justified, brutal way. And basically, it's this movie that has like a lot of this like sort of sleek David Fincher style, but I think it feels a bit more like blockbuster mainstream than a lot of Fincher's other movies, if you can, as much as that can be necessarily, depending on the movie. And I think it's like a very sleek, entertaining, fascinating, like mystery thriller movie that has some problems, I think particularly just from like the books that it's based on. This is also a problem I have with at least the original, the 2009 Swedish movie as well, that both of them have that weird thing where the movie kind of ends and then it goes on for another like 30 minutes so they can wrap up even more stuff about the story that I'm not huge on necessarily, but there's a lot of like awesome, sleek, stylish stuff from Fincher. Great performances from Craig, and particularly Mara. This was the first time really I saw Mara and was like, oh my god, she's like an incredible actress. She really disappears into this part. An amazing score from Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. Other great people show up like Stellan Skarsgård and Christopher Plummer. It's a very entertaining, especially with the snowy element of it. It's one of those movies where there's not as much like actual snow, but you get the sense of cold because obviously it takes place in like Sweden, and you feel like that constant sense of like everybody's got to wear a jacket in order to survive, and it's just like this constant sort of like dread that we're mentioning like really helps to build up like the tension of this mystery, while at the same time it's pulpy, entertaining, and very disturbing all at once. And I think it's something that only like a Fincher could really mix together so well. And then my bad pick is more of like a low budget feature, and it is Frozen. No, not the 2013 Disney movie. This is the 2010 movie from director Adam Green. And if you're unaware of this, basically it follows 3 college students, including Iceman himself, from the X-Men movies. They go up to snowboard at this big hill. While they're there, they mostly have to serve with Emma Bell, who plays like the girlfriend of one of the guys. Who is like not as experienced with snowboarding, so like they go on the bunny hill for a while. So the extreme sports heads dudes are like, okay, we're gonna like it's almost closing, and this place is gonna close for like a week because like of inclement weather. But we're gonna go up the last ski lift up to the top of like the actual extreme mountain, so we can do one last snowboard and then leave. But the trouble is, while they're there, the place starts closing up because of the inclement weather, and the staff ends up leaving, and they are stuck on the ski lift. And like I said, there's nobody that's going to be there for like a week, and it's a lot of sort of this survival story about trying to get out of the situation. There's a lot of tension with like them up on the ski lift, and somebody tries to like go down, and there's like horrible implications to that as well. It's a movie I'd heard a lot about, especially when it premiered at Sundance originally. It got a lot of like, people were like fainting in the audiences and stuff like that, but I hadn't seen it until like earlier this week, once again for the show. There's a lot of stuff I give it credit for, particularly with its very small budget. I give them a lot of credit for, they actually shot up on like a big ski lift in like Utah. So a lot of the shots were like they're actually up in the ski lift. There's no set, there's no green screen. It's those 3 actors that are actually up there in like a big ski lift. And there's a lot of impressive like low budget filmmaking there, even especially when some of the gory stuff happens. There's a lot of like, like squeaky stuff with another like, sort of bone coming out of the leg kind of element to it. There's fascinating stuff there, but it feels like it's an interesting premise in search of stuff to like fill out. For even like it's 93 minutes long, and it feels like it's kind of stretching, and like the characters aren't interesting enough to keep you engaged for that amount of time. And I think also just Adam Green is one of those guys where he's done like the Hatchet movies and like Digging Up the Marrow. There's a couple of those movies I like, but he kind of comes from the weird post Kevin Smith school of especially like genre filmmakers, where like a lot of the dialogue is just like referencing pop culture shit, like especially there's a point where like the guy who plays Iceman, who I forgot his name, the actor, but they do a whole thing while they're up there, but like, oh, what's your greatest fear to like pass the time? And he's like, oh man, the Sarlacc pit. I wouldn't want to go down near that thing. I'm like, yeah, that's cool. That's great. But it feels very much like a movie like sort of its time in a way where like there's a lot of impressive stuff to the filmmaking and the craft that's there for its low budget. But also it feels kind of like a movie that was popular for a bit in the early 2010s and then kind of came and went with, I think, good reason. It's not very memorable.
Yeah, I've seen both your picks. I agree with the girl with the drag tattoo. I think it's this weird, sort of pulpy thriller with moments of just brutality. I think Rooney Mara is amazing in it. I'd say her and Skarsgård probably are the tops in it because they're on such different ends of the spectrum. I think Daniel Craig's fine. He's good. I think the actor who played him in the original was better. Who was also, in John Wick and
Yeah, Michael Nyquist, R.I.P.
yeah, Michael Nyquist. He was great, great character actor. But yeah, I really liked that movie, and the score is brilliant.
And also, I didn't mention the opening credit sequence in that movie. Amazing.
so
Set
good.
to the
So
cover
good.
of the Immigrant Song. So good, yeah.
So good. But then Frozen, yeah, I agree with you on the Adam Green of it all. I liked Adam Green for a long time because I really got into like new upcoming horror. Like there was Adam Green, Ty West, Joe Lynch, all these guys that were coming out and they're like going to be the new faces of horror. Then Adam Green came straight out the gate with like Hatchet, and Hatchet is super fun. You're like, oh, okay. Well, then it got to the point where I started, and I'm not trying to badmouth anybody, but I started following him on his podcast, things like that. And I started disagreeing with a lot of his sort of stances on things. So I kind of stopped like giving a shit. Frozen was one that got a little bit more mainstream attention than a lot of them did. So I was like, oh, I got to see it. And the guy you were talking about, Sean Ashmore, by the way,
Yes.
who is Iceman. And yeah, there's a couple scenes in it that are pretty brutal. Like the jump scene with the legs, brutal. The wolf scene, pretty hardcore. Other than that, not great. I think Adam Green works the best when he's making sort of, for a lack of better term, because I don't even like using this term, but grindhouse style violent movies. I think he's got a really good eye for that. But yeah, just Frozen was ultimately kind of just, it exists. I saw it. I'm good.
Yeah, and I would argue of like that kind of the quote unquote grindhouse kind of filmmakers you mentioned, I would say Joe Lynch has had a much more consistent career. I
Oh
think
no,
he's
he's got the best. He's the best out of all of them so far, at least out of those guys. Joe Lynch has produced
but even
pretty
Ty
fun
West has
stuff.
had some pretty fun stuff recently with Pearl and stuff like that. So yeah,
Yeah, Pearl, House of the Devil, The Innkeepers. Ty West has produced some good shit. I just don't like Ty West.
true in general. But yeah, I think Lynch has a bit more of a track record as opposed to Adam Green being like, I'm going to make 3 Hatchet movies and produce like a third one and stuff like that. And just like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
It
he
seemed
did the
kinda
first
unnecessary for me
two,
to me.
produced the third, directed the fourth.
Yeah.
Then he had Frozen, Chillerama,
Digging Up the Marrow, which I would say is my favorite of his movies.
Digging Up the
I
Marrow-
think that movie's very interesting.
I think it's very interesting. I have two huge problems with that movie. A, it should have been Ray Wise. B, Adam Green is not a good actor. He's terrible.
I agree with necessarily Adam Green's not a great actor, but I think that's contrasted with Ray Wise is a great actor. And I think he's so great in that movie.
Right, but I think it would have worked if you'd have got maybe a virtual unknown, because nobody's going to watch that and think, oh, this is real. And that's why he said he didn't want to cast an unknown as that character, because people might believe it's real. Nobody's going to watch that and think it's real.
I think even if you had an unknown, I don't think I would have believed that movie was real necessarily.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Get an unknown so you can lean into the, oh my God, oh, this is crazy. It doesn't matter.
Well, I'm more just like I no matter who was cast, I wouldn't have believed it was real. So I prefer getting like a really good actor as opposed to like
that's
authenticity. Fair. Whatever, it's a fucking movie.
Yeah,
I really don't.
Yeah,
care.
that's fair. No, that's fair.
But anyway, we're getting off track here. So let us repeat our titles to everybody out there in case they missed them. Adam.
For my good, I had 30 Days of Night, and for my bad, I had Deadfall, 2012.
And for my good, I had The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, 2011. And for my bad, I had Frozen, 2010. Don't you love that when you have to put brackets around a movie to differentiate what you were talking about?
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, I do want to throw in, for your pick, you can avoid the sequels, and especially The Girl with the Spider's Web. Don't need to see.
No, I saw both of at least the ones to the Swedish movie.
Yeah.
And I was not a fan of those.
No.
And I heard and Girl with the Spider's Web, I heard, was just like a movie that does not exist, really.
It's terrible. No, it's terrible.
But yeah, let's go into our ending here where we'll be doing some thank yous and stuff, but stay tuned. At the very end, we'll be picking our movies for next week, so stay tuned for that. But we want to thank some people first, like Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music used for our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Christian Thor Lally for our artwork. Follow him at Night of Water, that's night with a K, _of_water, for more of his great stuff on various socials. And of course, thanks to our loyal Patreon supporters, patreon.com/DEDBpod, where for just $1 a month, you get access to bonus podcasts. We record usually at least one a month, and then also you get to vote in polls And right now, you'd be able to do both of those things because, we're recording this on Friday the 13th. Unfortunately, Friday the 13th has passed by the time this episode's come out, but you can still listen to our audio commentary where Adam and I talk along with the Friday the 13th remake from 2009. Had a fun time talking about that movie and, horror remakes from around that turn of the millennium and the franchise in general and Trent, our beloved Trent.
Trent's the shit. Trent's so good.
But along with listening to that audio commentary, you can also vote in a poll because we put out these polls for you to either vote for individual movies we cover or topics that we cover. And the day after this episode goes up on the Wednesday, you'll all be able to vote for the tie-in topic we'll be doing for the week of Creed 3 coming out. You all have to vote between our two potential topic choices for that of boxing films. We've done sports films before, but specifically films that majorly involve boxing as a plot element versus spin-offs, because obviously Creed is a spin-off of the Rocky franchise. So those two are going in for a bout, and who knows who will win at the end of that fight.
I'm pushing for boxing, but it's going to be spin-offs.
I think when we get to our topic for next week, that's proof that the Patreon poll can go anywhere.
That's true.
Yeah, for sure. So y'all, like I said, for the $1 a month, can listen to bonus podcasts like that one or vote in polls like that one and help out the show immensely. But for more of us, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at DEDBpod. And you can also submit feedback to us at doubleedgeddoublebill@gmail.com, all spelled out. And you can find me on Twitter and letterboxes at NotTheWho'sTommy. And I also do some writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com and at film-cred.com.
And you can find me on Instagram at Atom or Adam. That's ATOM_OR_ADAM. You can also find me on Letterboxd at Schwanson. That's SCHWANDTSON.
And for more of our audio antics, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and other podcasting platforms. If you're listening on Talk Film Society, why not listen to all the other great shows on the network? And you can also dig into the archives on our Podbean main feed for several, almost 200 episodes before we even joined Talk Film Society. And while I'm talking about Talk Film Society, I just want to shout out for them. Over on Talk Film Society, they have the annual Talk Film Society Awards, where basically if you go over to talkfilmsoc.com/TFS Awards, you can put in your own ballot for the Talk Film Society Awards, where you can put in your picks for Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Ensemble, Best Director. They have a bunch of stuff. You can leave stuff blank if you don't feel comfortable filling up everything. That's cool. But they're looking for votes, and the deadline is January 20th, so the Friday this episode comes out. So we'd recommend everybody go out there to that URL. I'll probably put it in the show notes as well. Help out Talk Film Society. Put in your submissions. It might end up getting you on the final ballot that everybody gets to vote for later in awards season.
Yeah, Talk Film is good, peeps. So help us out.
Yes. And, if you can't do the Patreon to help us out, that's cool. Money can be tight. We understand. But the completely free way to help us out is to rate, review, or simply share the show around to give us more visibility.
Yeah, you guys are starting to dry up out there, and I've noticed. So I'm just going to start getting way more hostile on the show. Way more hostile. And it's going to make it very uncomfortable for everyone.
Including me. I'm just sitting here just
oh no, especially you. No, I'm coming at you next week.
Even though I share the show, I'm the one person who consistently shares the show, maybe even more than you do.
No, definitely more than I do, but you're not going to have a good time.
I get the brunt of it because I do share it more. How dare you be the only one?
My name's Adam Thomas. Said, fuck you, Thomas, you fuck. That's what it's going to be.
Every intro from now on is going to be that at the start of the show.
Well, now you said that, I'm making it a thing, and then I'm also going to be like, fuck you, Thomas, you fuck. By the way, have you played Raid Shadow Legends? If you join now, you get exclusive Ronda Rousey champion.
And I'm sure Mr. McGorham's going to show up all your favorite characters you're going to run into the ground like you've done previously.
Oh, Mr. McGorham, I completely forgot. See, I forgot him. That's your fault. Hey, kids. Remember me? Oh.
Well, Adam, now it's time for us to mercifully end this episode by doing our picking for next week. Because every week, Adam and I, pick, a good and a bad feature. We switch up on the quality of who has the two good and two bad choices every week. We kind of flip-flop on that. And we assign each of our choices number between 1 and 10. and the other person has to pick. So they'll say, I'm going to pick number 3, and we'll say, okay, that's closest to number 1, which is this particular choice. So that's how we get our good and our bad feature. But keep in mind, there is the Godfather rule, where Adam and I each have a single veto in our back pocket to use. At least we were given one back in May, a veto in our back pocket to use. At some point, if we hear a choice that we pick, and we're like, you know what, I don't want to actually cover that movie, so actually I'll take the cannoli. We just say that, and then that choice is gone. We gotta go with whatever other choice is there. I have used my veto already. Adam still has his burning a hole in his back pocket, so he might be able to use it for my 2 bad choices, as we will cover here for next week's topic, which, as I kind of teased earlier, was picked by our patrons. Though it ties into, there's a couple movies coming out for the celebrated, lauded, lovely actress who has shown her chops for like the last 30 years or so. We're covering Miss Julianne Moore.
Yeah, she's fucking cool, man. She's always been sort of like a mainstay, like in a weird way, not like a huge like movie star mainstay, but like she's always been like, anytime you see her, you're like, oh, Julianne Moore, cool. Not necessarily great performances, but you always feel good to see her.
She's constantly working in various different projects, and she has a lot of interesting range. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. We'll talk about that with our choices. So, Adam, you have the 2 good choices. I've got the 2 bad. So I'll start here. For your 2 good choices, I'm going to pick number 7.
Okay. At number 9, I have a movie that, I think most people have seen, but it also is filled with like just great performances all around, and not to discredit hers at all. She's wonderful in it, but it's definitely an ensemble piece. I have Boogie Nights.
Hell yeah, Boogie Nights. Cool, great, so on board. Yeah, hell, hot take, great movie. Love that movie.
Yeah, for real.
Yes. But what was your other choice?
Oh, at number 2, I had another movie which I hope you watch before we get to it, which I'm sure you will. You'll probably watch like 800 Julianne Moore movies. But I have Still Alice, which is probably one of the most heartbreaking performances I've ever seen her give. But it's amazing. But it was one that I'm like, I'm kind of glad you didn't pick it. Although if you did, there'd be enough to talk about. But if you would have, we're going to cry. So I think we kind of lucked out.
I remember when she was nominated and ended up winning her first Oscar for that movie. I was very much in like Oscar catch-up mode around that time, and I was still just like, I don't know if I can fucking handle this, man.
It's hardcore,
it seems
dude.
like a lot.
It's a lot.
With what it's doing, yeah, for sure. But now, Adam, for my 2 bad choices.
I'll go number 3.
Okay. At number 2, I have, interestingly, the follow-up to a very acclaimed movie in which all love to Julianne Moore. She is highly miscast, even despite having a great supporting cast around her, great director, an iconic actor reprising his Oscar award-winning role from Silence of the Lambs. I have Hannibal from 2001.
I'm not taking the cannoli because I may be one of those people where I still don't think it's great, but I don't hate it. I don't hate Hannibal.
I'm curious, how long has it been since you've seen Hannibal?
Quite a while. So
okay, that might change. We'll see.
That might change.
Might
change.
Yes. We'll be able to talk about that next time. But on the other side of things, at number 9, I had a movie that is a bit more recent, where apparently she plays the villain and is one of those like really infamous like disastrous bombs from like the last decade. Though it stars Jeff Bridges and some kid I can't remember. I have Seventh Son.
Oh fuck. Oh, we'd have nothing to talk about. Oh, Seventh Son. Oh,
a real Whiteout scenario with Seventh Son.
Yeah, I want to say Seventh Son is. I think it's Ben Barnes. No, it's a terrible film.
Yeah, I've heard as much. And like I said, it bombed disastrously.
Oof.
And it was Ben Barnes who was in that lead role. Alicia Vikander's also in it. Wow, Kit Harington.
I'm probably the only person who remembers that it was Ben Barnes. So Ben Barnes, big up, baby. Subscribe to the Patreon.
But next time we'll be talking about Boogie Nights and Hannibal. But until then, everybody, remember Whiteout? Because I don't.
No, nothing.